Welcome to the Roberts Law Office Injury Podcast. Kentucky attorney Jeff Roberts has over 25 years of experience. He'll provide answers to your questions related to personal injury and automobile accidents, workers' compensation claims, and Social Security disability benefits. Let's join Jeff for this episode. And friends, welcome back. We are back in Callaway County with attorney Jeff Roberts. Jeff, how are you today?
I'm doing good, Jim. How are you?
Buddy, I'm doing great. The holidays are getting close. In fact, it's right about Thanksgiving, about the time this episode is going to be coming out, and that means Christmas isn't that far away. And I thought today we'd take kind of a PSA, kind of a public safety announcement, talking about holiday driving and, unfortunately, traffic accidents. So there's a number of different things we want to talk about, but, you know, it's that time of year. Everybody wants to have fun with the family. Everybody wants to, enjoy the holidays. And there are a lot of distractions, and I think that's a big part of what we're going to talk about today.
Correct. There certainly can be a lot of distractions this time of the year when you're out driving with the holidays, Christmas lights, Christmas decorations up. A lot of people specifically go out and drive to look at the Christmas lights and Christmas decorations. My wife and I've done that in the past, especially when our daughter was much smaller. We would go to places to look at the lights and the decorations, and then that gets you, kind of looking and paying attention to the lights as opposed to the road in front of you. So you get, the driver of the vehicle has to be very careful when you're doing that to make sure you're keeping an eye out on the road in front of you, and especially in some of these more crowded areas, you can have kids out running around playing when you're doing that as well. And so, unfortunately, kids will dart out into the roadway without looking at times. So being very careful, being aware of your surroundings, making sure you're keeping not only a look ahead, but looking off to the sides a little bit to make sure that there's no kids out running around. If you see any kids in the yard, especially if they're out close to the roadway, keep a little close eye and make sure they don't dart out in front of you because they're chasing something or whatever.
Well, and that brings up the fact, if it's not you, because maybe you are paying attention, the other drivers are definitely going to be distracted. And again, that's just another way of kind of messing up a holiday season. So, we want to talk about that here in a few minutes. Jeff, you've been doing this for about 30 years now. You've got two offices. Your primary office is right here in Callaway County. And then earlier this year, you opened the one up in Christian County, up in Hopkinsville.
That's right. Yeah, and actually I just finished up my 31st year in October. I started practicing in October of 92. So just finished the 31st year of practicing and somewhat celebrated this year by opening up a second office up in Hopkinsville. And so I can meet clients up in that area now as well. And it seems to be working out well for the clients up in that area. It saves them the drive down to Murray from that standpoint. So I'm able to kind of, serve a little larger area.
Well, so when you talk about going up to Hopkinsville, obviously it's a road trip, right? And I think a lot of the families are going to be doing some road tripping this year. If you're going out to see maybe your parents live out of town, or maybe you're going out to see other family, extended family somewhere. And that brings up the issue that, obviously there are a lot of county roads here, but there are also some larger highways. And the problem is, about this time of year, the snow starts coming in, the ice starts coming in, and people aren't really used to that, right?
True. Especially in western Kentucky, we get snow occasionally, but we don't get a lot of snow in this area, and the road departments do their best to get the roads clean. But even, one of the things that occurs is even if they clear the roads off, or they're clear when you start driving, when the sun goes down, then you have ice develop a lot of times, and you can have black ice where you really don't see it until it's too late and you're starting to slide. From that standpoint. So, yeah, this time of the year, and it doesn't have to be snow. I mean, you could have a rain. If it's a real cold evening, you can have rain, and then after the sun goes down, it drops below freezing, and you can have black ice develop then as well. So it can be temperature related versus what's falling out of the sky to some extent in causing that freezing or the roadways to be in a dangerous condition. And then with a lot of people do travel for the holidays. My wife and I actually are going to my daughter's this year for Thanksgiving. And so the roads are a little more crowded than they normally would be. Some of the interstates are. more crowded than they normally would be. So you have to be a little more careful in that regard. And unfortunately, there are some people who, when they're driving, you have some who camp out in the left lane and people start weaving in and out of traffic trying to get around slower traffic, and that can cause people to be in accidents, and actually can ultimately result in multi-vehicle accidents, which I know we've talked about before.
Absolutely.
From that, where you've got people trying to weave in and out of traffic, and then if they cause one accident, then the people behind them come in and involved in multiple collisions from that standpoint.
Well, especially if you have the icy roadways, that's bound to happen, and we've seen that on the highways going up and back from Louisville. There's that happens. I mean, it's because people tend to follow a little bit more closely than they probably should, especially in inclement weather. Because again, it's like muscle memory. We're trying to get used to driving in the bad weather again, and people kind of forget, hey, I need to slow down a little bit, or I need to increase some following distance.
Exactly, and the following distance is something, especially what your following distance on a nice clear summer day versus your following distance when there's snow and ice on the roadways is vastly different. You need to give yourself a lot more room to be able to come to a stop in those other when the roads are in bad condition from that standpoint. And the 3 car lengths or 3 second rule is what I prefer to go by on the distance back behind the vehicle that I'm 3 car lengths is not enough on an interstate. The 3 seconds that you need to be behind the car in front of you when you're going at those kind of speeds is nowhere near the distance that you need. You need to be much further back when the roads are slick. And problems, especially with crowded roadways, is you may be the right distance back, and then somebody comes around and moves in front of you, and then you've got to gain that distance back for your own safety from that standpoint. And then the other side to that is when you do travel to family members for Thanksgiving, you may be going to a community you're not real familiar with, so you're also traveling on roads that you're not as familiar with. So knowing where you're going, and a lot of people nowadays have the GPS and they use the GPS, which is good. Or can be good from that standpoint, but also pay attention because some roads can be blocked off or whatever, and if you're not used to it, I've seen people do it here in Murray and Mayfield where I grew up, where you have a 1 lane road and somebody not being familiar with that area and turn and start going the wrong direction on the 1 lane highway. So you need to be very careful when you're traveling in a community you're not familiar with.
That makes a lot of sense. And as we transition to this next topic, we're going to talk a little bit about again some of the distractions, and we touched a little bit on it. People looking at Christmas lights, that's all well and good. You got kids in the car, kids out in the yard, but with that in particular, one thing I always like to say is, hey, when the weather changes, make sure you throw a blanket in the back seat because you never know if you're going to get delayed or unfortunately something could happen. Make sure you've got an extra blanket out there because if you're waiting on some people to show up to an accident site, it surely can get kind of cold out there. And I always like to treat these as, again, these PSA announcements to say, hey, look, you know what are some things you can do to prepare?
That's true. That's a very good idea. I've represented clients in the past. One that really comes to mind that he was a truck driver. He's on the job at the time and was involved in a wreck in the wintertime. He was out in a very rural area, and it took the ambulance more than an hour before the ambulance got out to him to where he was at, because it was a very rural area and it wasn't an area that was well serviced with ambulances to start with, and there was another accident that they had to deal with, he was out in that condition in cold weather for a good period of time, and ended up with some additional health consequences as a result of that. So having, even though your vehicle has a heater on it, your vehicle may not crank anymore. And it may not be safe to crank it, even if it does crank, because there could be a gas line or something that's leaking. So having, a blanket, some big coats on when you're traveling, or in the vehicle when you're traveling in that situation, is a very smart idea.
I used to live up in Minnesota and Wisconsin, and they always gave these tips and ideas about, hey, inclement weather driving. We always put an extra toboggan, like in a little coffee can, and maybe some extra pair of gloves, and definitely extra pair of socks. Little things like that can make a big difference. If you've gone out and you're trying to do something, you're standing in the snow, your feet get wet, it could be miserable, especially like that trucker if you're waiting an extended period of time for people to get there, or the kiddos are, and it can
Right.
make life miserable. It's easy enough just to throw a gym bag in the back, pile all that stuff in there and not worry about it. If somebody puts their feet on it, no big deal. But instead of having it in the trunk, you may not be able to get to the trunk. At least you're here and it's in the back seat and it's easier to get to.
Right, and that's a very good idea from that standpoint. And if you're in that situation, you will be very glad that you've taken those steps.
I think so. I think so as well. So we've talked about the kids and we've talked about the lights, but we've done episodes on distracted driving. Usually we're talking about cell phones and things like that. And of course that's going to be predominant, during this period when you're trying to coordinate with everybody and look at the GPS and do all these other things.
Correct.
But you've also got your mind on gifts, or you've got your mind on maybe the casserole in the back seat, making sure everything's okay. I mean, there are so many different distractions, and it's okay just to take a breath and take a moment and say, okay, look, I need to focus on this. So that stuff, kind of try to get it out of the way before you hit the road maybe, and then focus on the road, because you've got some other distracted drivers who may not be as conscientious as you are, and you've got some weather conditions, and then you've got people who are not from around here who are also trying to figure out the roadways as well.
Right, and that's a very good point from that standpoint. Is when you are driving, this time of the year, especially the holidays, it's usually around the holidays, family gatherings, that people drive with food in the vehicle that they're taking somewhere. From that standpoint, and I know from my own personal experiences where we've, especially going to family members at Christmas time, and we got presents packed in the back, and then we got food packed in the back, and then make a turn a little faster than my wife would like for me to have made the turn or something.
I thought you were going to say she was driving, so no. Okay.
But we hear a package, a present slide around her, and then. And she was always worried that it fell on top of the food or something of that nature. And then, so it made me more nervous from the standpoint of driving in that regard. And it, that would take your attention away. And so making sure you have everything where it is in a safe position, so you don't have to have that worry as much. Or in the other side of it is, especially this time of the year, you always need everybody, front, back seat passengers, all need to have their seat belts on. But, sometimes it gets crowded and people may not be as when you've got boxes and everything else. Doesn't matter. Get those seat belts on. Make sure everybody in the vehicle is belted in like they should be.
Well, and I know my family and friends listen to the podcast. They listen to this podcast from time to time as well. And I just need to warn them ahead of time. If I am in a fender bender during the holiday seasons, that green bean casserole may show up with a few scoops out of it. But, if we get delayed, I'll be prepared. Exactly. I'll have my blanket and my green bean casserole.
You need to also put a spoon in there with your blanket. So.
Good point. Hey, Jeff, let's talk about this. We did a previous episode on safe driving tips around tractor trailers, the big trucks that you see all over the roads, right. Especially during the holiday season. They're dealing with the same stuff we're dealing with. But, the theme here has kind of been, okay, maybe you are traveling out of your local area. Maybe you're traveling to a different state. Maybe you're traveling, all the way down to Florida or somewhere else just to go visit family. Let's talk about what happens when you're in an accident outside of the state of Kentucky, but you live in Kentucky. How does that affect your insurance, and kind of what are the things we need to think about?
Well, yeah, when you're in an accident in another state, if you're a Kentucky resident, have Kentucky insurance, and you're traveling to out of state to visit family over the holidays, traveling somewhere on vacation, and you're involved in a motor vehicle collision that is not your fault, then you have a claim against the at-fault driver, which would be governed by the laws in the state where the accident happened. As a general rule, that's where it's going to be. The claim's going to be filed from that standpoint. But then, Kentucky has, as we've discussed before, Kentucky has the PIP benefits of personal injury protection, basic reparations, no fault, same benefit has multiple different names that different people call it, but that's still going to be governed by Kentucky law because your insurance contract was purchased in Kentucky. Now,
Even though I got in an accident somewhere out of
even though
Kentucky.
exactly now Kentucky has it. If an out of state person is in the wreck in Kentucky, they don't have Kentucky insurance. Then, but that insurance company writes policies in Kentucky. Kentucky law says that they have to provide Kentucky PIP coverage, even if that's not purchased. So Tennessee, State Farm writes policies in Tennessee. They don't have PIP coverage in Tennessee. They have MedPay coverage there. If the person is in Kentucky, they get 10,000 of PIP because State Farm writes policies in Kentucky and they're subject to that law. So if you're in another state that has that type of law, they may require your insurance to provide even better coverage than what Kentucky has there. But at a very minimum, you're going to get the 10,000 of PIP coverage that Kentucky law mandates there. And if you purchase more than that, whatever you purchase, because your contract is going to govern in that standpoint. And then you still could have an underinsured motorist claim, which
Do you want to explain that really quickly?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Underinsured motorist claim is a claim where the at-fault driver does not have sufficient policy limits, sufficient insurance coverage to cover all of your damages, all your bodily injury damages as a result of the accident. And if that's the situation, then most people in Kentucky, it's optional coverage. It's not mandated that you have this coverage, but most people do purchase this coverage, and that's called what's called underinsured motorist. It's the vehicle that hit you that's at fault. It does not have enough insurance, so they're underinsured. And so if you've got underinsured motorist coverage, then you would have a claim against your insurance for that coverage for your damages over and above what the limits are of the at-fault driver. And that's a Kentucky case. That is a case to be brought in Kentucky because the insurance contract was purchased in Kentucky. And in those situations, usually what I recommend people do is if you're a Kentucky resident and you're injured in a state outside of Kentucky, is to get a Kentucky attorney involved to look at it to see if you've got the coverages for Kentucky. And then the Kentucky attorney can put you in touch with the Tennessee or another state's attorney wherever the accident happened to handle the liability portion of the claim, and the Kentucky attorney makes sure the PIP benefits are being paid the way they're supposed to be. And if there is a UIM claim, underinsured motorist claim, then that claim can be pursued from that standpoint. And usually, the attorneys work together in those. I've got a lot of attorneys out of state that have clients in their state that were injured in Kentucky, and they reach out to me to handle the Kentucky part of the case, and then they handle the part in their state, and vice versa. If it's a Kentucky resident that comes to me, I get somebody that I do the research, find a good attorney in that state, associate with them on that case, and work with them on that claim, and then handle the Kentucky part of the case. So it's kind of common practice among attorneys to do that. From that standpoint.
And the nice thing is, even though you're located down here in Callaway County in western Kentucky, you can handle a motor vehicle accident all the way over in Prestonsburg or all the way over in Ashland. I mean, it doesn't really matter. You're licensed in the state of Kentucky to practice these motor vehicle accidents.
Correct. I can handle a motor vehicle accident anywhere in Kentucky from that standpoint. So yes, I can, and I've represented clients all over the state of Kentucky in the past. Currently have clients in multiple jurisdictions. I know I've got a couple of clients up in the Jefferson County area, one or two over in the Fayette area. So I've got clients all over the state of Kentucky now, and it's not uncommon.
Right. And friends, you've heard us mention a couple of times, we've talked about this in a previous episode, or this was in an episode on this. In the show notes, which are all those paragraphs below where you're actually listening to this, when you hit play to listen to this, all those paragraphs are called the show notes. And in there, I will have specific links to these other episodes that we've actually referenced to make it really easy for you. So we talked a little bit last time in episode 65 about the PIP insurance and the underinsured motorist coverage, things like that. And those will have links also to previous episodes as well. So again, just because you haven't listened to a previous episode, check the show notes, and it might be a really good breadcrumb trail to some more information about these topics. Jeff, let's talk a little bit then about if I don't live in Kentucky. So I'm an out-of-state driver, but yet I do get into a collision here inside of Kentucky. How does that happen? And I know we talked a little bit about it again back in 65, but there's going to be a lot of people traveling through Kentucky for the holidays. So let's go ahead and kind of put that in there as well.
Yeah, and it's the same situation, kind of, or the reverse situation of Kentucky resident having an accident out of state. If you're traveling from out of state and you're involved in a accident in Kentucky, the at-fault driver, the claim against the at-fault driver is going to be a Kentucky motor vehicle claim. So it's going to need to be brought in Kentucky from that standpoint. And, again, you can reach out if you're a Tennessee resident and you think you've got a claim under Tennessee law for MedPay coverage. Kentucky's PIP is going to be better. And when you talk to me about that, I'm going to say, well, if your insurance company writes in Kentucky, then we can do the PIP coverage instead of the MedPay, because most of the MedPay I've seen in Tennessee has been $5,000. Kentucky's $10,000, so it's better to be under Kentucky law.
And that $10,000 is $10,000 for each passenger in the vehicle.
Each person in the vehicle, and it's for the vehicle you're in, not the at-fault driver's insurance. Now, eventually, the at-fault driver's insurance will reimburse the other insurance carriers most, if not all, of the money they have to pay out in PIP, but it's on the vehicle you're in is who's responsible for the PIP, and we've got some episodes previously why the law is that way from there. But then you may have a case out in, an underinsured motorist case that could be filed in Tennessee from that standpoint, or whatever state you're from. And if you reach out to me first on it, I'm going to look at where, if the underinsured motorists, if we got a better jurisdiction here in Kentucky than where you're located, then, I'll talk to the attorney where the case would be brought at in that state, have the conversation with them. And if you're better off there, I'll make sure you get with a good attorney there. If you're better off here, we can try to pursue it here. From that standpoint, we would look into that. From that situation. But if you come to me first, I will put you in touch. If you need to go back to your state to handle the underinsured, I'd put you in touch with a good attorney there. If you get an attorney there, hopefully they will be getting in touch with me or another very good attorney in Kentucky that knows car wreck law to handle the Kentucky part of the case for you.
And Jeff, I know we've talked a lot about personal injury, which is a significant part of your practice, has been for 31 years now. But you also do workers' comp.
Correct.
And you're going to have a lot of delivery drivers out on the roads, trying to make those last-minute deliveries, trying to get all that done. You can also represent someone who's a driver who's been injured while working. So there's not only the regular accident, there could also be a workers' comp aspect to it, correct? Correct.
There can be a workers' comp aspect to the case from that standpoint, and I do workers' comp and have done workers' comp since 1992. From that standpoint, when I first started practicing, I limited my practice, went to work with another gentleman who limited his practice, I should say. And so I started off with a very limited practice of representing individuals who've been injured or disabled usually as a result of somebody else's negligence. But yeah, I started off handling workers' compensation and personal injury cases in October of '92, and have been doing so ever since.
And so when that happens, we had another episode on third-party accidents, and that's when you're injured by someone who is third party is really more like a job site, or you're at a location and one of their people come up and cause a problem. But if you're a driver, if you're a sales rep trying to make those you're in the fourth quarter, you're trying to make that year-end bonus. So I know you're out there trying to knock on the doors and get it done. If you're in an accident, again, you're probably in the normal course of your work. So again, you not only have the personal injury claim, but then at the same time, you've got the workers' comp claim, and you can actually file those at the same time, right?
Correct. You can file those your claim against your employer is a workers' compensation claim. But if somebody else is negligent in causing your injuries, then you've got a claim against a negligent party as well. So you've got a workers' compensation case. You also have a motor vehicle collision against the at-fault driver in that setting, and both of those are separate claims, but they have interplay among each other. The workers' comp carrier will pay medical bills, lost wages, but they're also then become entitled to recover that back from the personal injury claim against whoever's at fault in causing the accident. And if you don't take care of that and if you don't coordinate those two cases, it can ultimately cost the injured person money out of their pocket. And so the best way to maximize the recovery for the injured person is for those claims to either be handled by one attorney, or if two attorneys are handling those, and I've been involved in that situation where one attorney already had the personal injury claim, saw the workers' comp aspect of it, and brought me in to handle the workers' comp side of it, and we would work together and coordinate everything to make sure that when I resolved the workers' comp claim, it was going to benefit them in the personal injury claim, or vice versa if the personal injury claim resolved before the workers' comp claim did.
And of course, to talk about the other leg of your practice, Social Security disability, some of these accidents and some of these injuries that result from these accidents are going to be severe enough that you may actually qualify for Social Security disability. And that, at that point, you could literally handle for them the accident claim, the workers' comp claim, and the Social Security disability claim all concurrently, all at the same time, right?
Yes, and I have done that in the past. I don't like my clients to have that severe of injuries,
Exactly.
obviously, but
Exactly.
that does occur at times from that standpoint. And yes, I can and do handle all of those types of cases.
Well, friends, we kind of covered a lot of different stuff here in this episode, a lot of different topics that are going to be hectic and that are going to be real as you get out there on the roads. And we're hoping that you don't need to call Jeff, but there's a chance, whether it's somebody else's negligence or whether you kind of get into a situation you've just got questions and you need to get the right answers. Jeff has offices once again down here in Callaway County and Murray. He's got one up in Christian County, up in Hopkinsville. But Jeff, really, they could use the same phone number. And what would be the best way for them to get a hold of you?
Yeah, the same phone. It's the same phone number from that. The best way to reach me is by phone, and that's the phone number is 270-753-0053. You can also email me at jeff@jeffrobertslaw.com. From that standpoint, either of those will get to me, but the phone is the best way to get in touch with me.
That way, if you get that message and you're able to kind of get in touch with them quicker, you don't have to worry about, well, let me check my email later and see if anything came through. A phone call's a phone call. People tend to pick them up.
Correct. A phone call. And when you call my office, I get frustrated when I call businesses and then you get, this non-living voice on the other side, and you got to push one and then 5 and 2 and everything else. And then you then leave a message instead of talking to a live person. I've got, I do have rollover lines, so sometimes people are busy and they can't answer the phones. But the vast majority of time, when you call my office, a live person is going during business hours. A live person is going to pick up the phone and talk with you. And if I'm not available to talk, they will give me a detailed message and I will return your phone call.
Well, what's interesting is you've also got a really innovative click-to-chat feature on your website now. So if I'm at jeffrobertslaw.com, and as soon as that page comes up, usually a little pop-up will show up and say, "Hey, would you like to talk now?" And that can actually get a piece of information to you fairly quickly.
Correct. Yeah, there's a couple of ways through that, because you can fill out the contact form, and then I will be notified when a new contact form is submitted. I don't get it by text, but I get notified by text, and then I can go on my email and look at it there, and you can get in touch with me that way after hours, especially. From that, you can get in touch with me during office hours as well. there in my, if I'm not mistaken, I think it's got a click to call button on there as well. So, yeah, when you're on there, if you're looking at the website to gain information, which is what we have all the information on there for. If you have, something, if you got a type of case that I handle and you've got a question about that, you can just hit that click to call. If it's during business hours, it will should call and connect you over to me at that point too.
Outstanding. Well, once again, friends, we hope you don't necessarily need Jeff's services during the holidays in particular, but if you do, there are a lot of different ways to get in touch with him. Jeff, I do appreciate your time. It's always good to see you down here in Callaway County. I always enjoy coming down and chatting with you again, and I want to wish you and your family happy Thanksgiving, Merry Christmas, and happy holidays, my friend.
Happy holidays to everybody out there. And do, if you're traveling this holiday season, be careful.
Thank you for listening to the Roberts Law Office Injury Podcast. Jeff will return in 2 weeks. Until then, he invites you to visit jeffrobertslaw.com and follow his firm on Facebook. At the Roberts Law Office, you'll find a history of small town service and big city results.